on what we're going to be talking about today. Let's focus in on what we're going to be talking about today. Let's put our phones away. I guarantee you, I promise you right here and now, I promise you, with 100% certainty, there are very few things in life that are 100% certain, right? I can tell you with 100% certainty that there will be no exam questions on anything that happens next week or anything. That I can promise. However, flip side of that, I promise you right here and now, plenty of questions on stuff we're going to be talking about in class today, stuff like that, I promise you do. So therefore, from a logical perspective, what is more important? I think so. Whatever. You want to try your best, right? All right. Today, what do we want to talk about? What? Yes. Consumer behavior. So we want to talk about consumer behavior. It's pretty important, right, in marketing. Consumer behavior. You know, as I always say to everybody, fundamentally, when we talk about consumer behavior, we talk about marketing. Marketing, I argue, is really all about the consumer. All about the consumer, right? By the way, the sound of HVAC system going here is kind of loud, isn't it? Kind of distracting, isn't it? Can we turn it off? Of course, we know that as soon as we turn it off, this place is going to turn into a song. Right? Well, that's good, right? But,
Okay.
It's already a song. Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. So when we talk about the consumer, is there a difference between a consumer and a customer? Very different. We use this word all the time. Consumer versus customer. Is there a difference? There is.
Yep.
You say yes. You say yes? What's the difference?
The difference is the consumers are customers, but not the customers are not always the consumers.
Are you sure? So all German shepherds are dogs, but not all dogs are German shepherds, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, when we talk, you're quite right. So when we talk about consumers, ultimately, when we use that word consumer within this context, what do we mean? We mean that essentially that entity, if you will, that makes the purchase for personal and or household use. That's what a consumer is all about, right? I.e., the purchase is not for resale. Right? And that stands in contrast to organizational purchasing, which absolutely can be for resale, ultimately, right? So an organization can be a customer, absolutely. In fact, a consumer can be a customer also. However, an organization typically can't be a consumer per se. Right? So I hope that is kind of clear. Is that clear? Yes? Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, so a consumer is that entity that makes that purchase for personal or household use or end use of the that purchase for end use or household use, i.e. not for resale. That's what the consumer does. That's what we want to consumer. Which stands in contrast to an organization. An organization makes purchases typically why? Because they're using this as an ingredient component, or they want to resell, or whatever, right? Not for personal use, not for household use, for resale. So it stands in contrast. So an organization can be a customer, but then a consumer can be a customer too. So let's start off then. I always like to play this video here whenever we talk about consumer behavior. In fact, just a few days ago, I played it for my undergrad. course in consumer behavior, which I teach. And we all know Steve Jobs, am I right? Right? Steve Jobs, we all know Steve Jobs, right?
Yeah.
So, by the way, Steve Jobs, what do you think of Steve Jobs? I mean, yes, sadly he's passed away and everything else, and he's not at the helm, of course, obviously, because he's passed away of Apple right now. What's the idea? What do you think of Jobs?
He's a visionary.
Huh?
Was a visionary leader.
I would agree. Yeah, absolutely. Very much a visionary leader, right? Very much a visionary kind of a marketer, right? I would argue that, and he's a guy really who had no real business or marketing training or education per se, right?
Yeah.
But he really had, as I say, one in a million that has that, one in
Charisma.
100 million, really that has that sort of natural kind of marketing kind of sense to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, was he really the technical guy behind the whole company and everything else? No, not really.
No, yeah.
Not really. He had the vision, as you rightfully said, but other people could execute the ideas that he had, right? So, yeah, that's really a very nicely worded description, I would say, of Jobs, namely that he is very much a visionary kind of guy, for sure. So, and of course, he was a bit of a prick too, right?
Yeah.
Like he was a dick to
Yeah.
work with too, right? But I mean, that's okay, I guess. That's okay. But yeah, very, very interesting kind of guy. So anyway, all that to say that I want to play you a little video of Steve Jobs. It's only 5 minutes. We'll probably watch about 3 minutes of it or so. But it is during a major shareholder meeting, I guess it was, or whatever. And he was responding to a question from the audience. And he says some very important things that are important to us as marketers and very important to us right here and now as we seek to unpack aspects associated with consumer behavior. So let us play this video. Get this started.
Mr. Jobs, you're a bright and influential man.
Here it comes.
It's sad and clear that on several accounts you've discussed, you don't know what you're talking about. I would like, for example, for you to express in clear terms how, say, Java, in any of its incarnations, addresses the ideas embodied in OpenDoc. And when you're finished with that, perhaps you could tell us what you personally have been doing for the last 7 years.
You know, you can please some of the people some of the time, but one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman are right in some areas. I'm sure that there are some things OpenDoc does, probably even more that I'm not familiar with, that nothing else out there does. And I'm sure that you can make some demos, maybe a small commercial app that demonstrates those things. The hardest thing is, how does that fit in to a cohesive, larger vision that's going to allow you to sell $8 billion, $10 billion of product a year? And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that. And I think that's the right path to take. I remember with the LaserWriter, we built the world's first small laser printers, you know, and there was awesome technology in that box. We had the first Canon laser printing, cheap laser printing engine in the world, in the United States here at Apple. We had a very wonderful printer controller that we designed. We had Adobe's PostScript software in there. We had AppleTalk in there. Just awesome technology in the box. And I remember seeing the first printout come out of it, and just picking it up and looking at it and thinking, you know, we can sell this. Because you don't have to know anything about what's in that box. All we have to do is hold this up and go, do you want this? And if you can remember back to 1984, before laser printers, it was pretty startling to see that. People went, whoa, yes. And that's where Apple's got to get back to. And, you know, I'm sorry that OpenDoc's a casualty along the way, and I readily admit there are many things in life that I don't have the faintest idea what I'm talking about. So I apologize for that too. But there's a whole lot of people working super, super hard right now at Apple. You know, Avi, John, Garino, Fred, I mean, the whole team is working, burning the midnight oil, trying to, and people, you know, hundreds of people below them, to execute on some of these things, and they're doing their best. And I think that what we need to do, and some mistakes will be made, by the way. Some mistakes will be made along the way. That's good, because at least some decisions are being made along the way. And we'll find the mistakes, we'll fix them. And I think what we need to do is support that team.
Okay. So, what did he say? What did he say? What are some of the important points there?
He said always start with customer experience and work backward to technology.
Starting with
Customer.
the customer experience, right? Starting with the customer experience. Do you have an exact question? Whenever a professor used to say that, when I was, you know, learning for stars, and, you know, I mean, that's smart.
Something interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you'd be surprised how many do not do that. Ooh, big cities. Anyways, okay, so the customer experience, how can we start with the so-called customer experience? How? Obviously, conceptually, how can we do it? How can we start with the so-called customer experience?
So he said with Apple, they sort of asking where can we take the customers or what benefits can we give them rather than staying with the engineers or the tech guys.
Absolutely, yeah. So really the point that I'm trying to draw out here in a very broad sense is that, you know, when we talk about starting with the customer experience, which is absolutely correct, you know, and working backwards from there, you know, is that in sync with, and does that capture the spirit of the marketing concept? Meeting the needs and wants of the consumer? Probably, yeah, does it? Absolutely it does, right? So it's all about adopting that consumer-centric kind of an approach, which is what Jobs is saying, right?
Yeah.
Put the consumer first and foremost. How do we do all that? How do we do all that? We do that by understanding
Analyzing
the
consumer behavior.
Understanding the consumer, right? And this is something
Yeah.
that I am going to be, I just said it now, and you know what, before today's class is ending, I probably will say it about 50 more times,
Yeah.
frankly. And before the end of the course here, I probably will say that phrase maybe 1,000 more times, right? Understanding the consumer. And how do we do it? By studying and understanding the domain, the discipline of consumer behavior, right? And that's what we're going to be unpacking today and understanding. And frankly, That will be the emphasis on the entire course. Why? Because that's what marketing is all about, I argue. It's all about understanding the consumer, right? So what did he say? First and foremost, we have to try to determine what experience we want to bring to the consumer, and to extract that, what else did he say? He used a B word, and that is benefits,
Benefits.
right? And I will again cite his specific words here, I'll quote him word for word. What is it? It's all about determining what benefits we can bring to the customer. What benefits can we bring to the customer? What benefits can we bring to the customer? So we've just used the word benefit here. So then I can ask you the question, well, why is this word benefit so important? Why is this word benefit so important? I'm going to say something right. Okay, please. Go.
The consumer perception has to be that if I purchase this product or service, I'm getting some value, and
Yes.
it's more than what I'm paying. So the value must exceed the cost or expense, as
Okay.
you're saying.
Okay, I get the point that you're making.
Yeah.
I get the concept. I would sort of tweak the terminology a little bit to make it a bit more precise, but I get the concept and I love it. Well said. Well said. Very good thinking here. So when we talk about the benefits, why is it benefit so important? Well, I will say it now, and I'll say it again and again. Another good question here too, probably. But, fundamentally, we make the point that, at the end of the day, consumers buy benefits. They don't buy attributes or features, if you will, conceptually speaking. And that will become clear in a few minutes. Consumers buy benefits. They don't necessarily buy attributes per se, okay? We're speaking conceptually, okay? So that is a key thing, and that will become clear momentarily. Consumers buy
Benefits.
They don't buy
Attributes.
right? An attribute is another word for
Features.
Features or something, right? So, key thing, right? So, job said, starts with the customer experience, work backward from there, and importantly, what benefits can we bring to the consumer, and why is that important? Because consumers buy, they don't
Benefits.
buy, right?
Attributes.
So that's a key thing. So against that backdrop then, we want to sort of unpack that and delve into the discipline of consumer behavior in more detail. And more specifically, we recognize then in our overall course, and I've mentioned this to you before, over and over again, what is an overall marketing strategy? That is an overall marketing strategy. We've explained that before, explained it during the initial videos that hopefully you guys have watched. We mentioned it before in class, so that is a complete marketing strategy, and it is also the map that we use for our course. So specifically then, when we talk about this essential, critical, they're all critical, but especially critical box right here, customer targets, customer targets, in order to facilitate and complete that particular component, we have to execute everything we're about to talk about today, consumer behavior. So the discipline of consumer behavior plugs right into that. So if we're to do marketing, we need to do this, and to do this, especially this box, we need to understand consumer behavior. And consumer behavior is the subject of today. So that is a key thing. So that's our thinking here. Next class, we'll be talking about this box here, competitor targets, where we talk about scanning the environment and engaging in the market analysis. But anyway, this is where we are today. So more specifically then, we will be talking about consumer behavior. We'll be talking about that very important notion that we call segmentation. Segmentation, critically important, integral to marketing, right? Marketing to a large extent is about segmentation, right? What about accountants, finance folks, management guys? Do they get involved in, segmentation? Yeah, the answer is no, definitely not. Segmentation and positioning, all these kind of things, fundamentally a marketing kind of functions. Okay? So yeah, we will be talking about that important topic. I mean, what is it? How to analyze consumer behavior. When we talk about analyzing consumer behavior, essentially we're talking about the five W's, right? Who, what, where, when, how. That's our thinking. Okay?
Yeah.
So against that backdrop then, we will explore the whole domain of consumer behavior. Right? And those are the tools, and that's the thinking we bring to bear in order to understand the consumer, in order to fulfill the benefits that they're seeking, and importantly, to set that experience first and foremost. Right? So that's the thinking that we bring to bear. And of course, we will probably the last 15 minutes of today's class or so talk a little bit about organizational buying behavior, and we'll talk about segmentation as it relates to the organizational level and organize that, how that looks. Right? So first individual consumer, and then for the last few minutes we'll elevate it and think macro, think large scale, think B2B at the organizational level, not the individual consumer level. So that's where we're going. So the first question we want to ask ourselves then is, what exactly is this thing that we call consumer behavior, right? Well, you know what? Key thing to remember here is that like any other domain within marketing, and consistent with what I am saying, what marketing is all about, is it a static, never-ending, never-changing kind of concept? No, it's not. It is very much a process, yeah? Very much a process. So yeah, consumer behavior is a process, and it's a process whereby we seek to understand how the consumer makes that decision, how they make that purchase decision, and importantly, the thinking that goes into that. So it's really about how they sort of, understand a particular need that arises, and it is very much about how they will select, how they'll purchase, and really how they will ultimately dispose of products in order to satisfy their needs and wants. Right? That's what consumer behavior is all about. I'll say it again. So what is it all about? It very much is a process where we seek to understand how individual consumers then, or groups, but typically consumers, will select, purchase, and dispose of products intended to meet their needs and wants. And when we look at consumer behavior that way, we recognize then that that really is a summation. It captures the multitude of definitions that exist out there. Because like I was telling you guys before, in marketing, for any topic area, and indeed for marketing itself, there are a wide variety of formal definitions out there, right? So what I just told you to define consumer behavior captures basically the common themes that exist out there. Are you with me here? Are we good? So it's important, like I do for every major topic area, to put a stake in the ground and to understand what we mean by the topic area right up front, right off the bat, right? So at this point, we're all talking off of the same field, so to speak. So yeah, a lot of definitions that exist out there. So key thing here is that as marketers and as business people, what do we want to do? Consistent with what Job said, what do we want to do? We want to take that consumer and put the consumer first and foremost in everything we do. In other words, we want to adopt, as I like to say, a consumer-centric approach, a consumer-centric approach. And that basically means putting the consumer first and foremost in everything we do. Not only from a marketing perspective, but I make the argument that, from an organizational perspective, the organization should create that culture whereby it is consumer-oriented. Right? So that consumer centrism, use fancy words, that consumer centrism should be inculcated within the culture of the organization, is the point. And I furthermore would argue that, when you look at any major organization that has been highly successful, they have adopted said perspective. Okay, so that is key. Right, so armed with that then, we can say, all right, that's all kind of cool. How does that, broadly, if you speak broadly now, how does that relate to marketing overall as a whole, right? Well, I've already established that connection for you. I've already had that slide, right? Is there a connection? Yes, there is a connection, and I've already told you. That is the connection. Marketing strategy, I'll say it again. To do marketing, we have to think strategically, we have to formulate an overall marketing strategy. How do we do that? This is how we do it. How do we do that particular component? By studying consumer behavior. So that's how consumer behavior plugs into and relates to overall marketing. So yes, there is absolutely a connection between marketing strategy, and consumer behavior analysis. Because, in a very, very broad sense, we recognize as marketers, and I'm speaking very, very somewhat esoterically here, very high level, as marketers, generally what do we try to do? Broadly speaking, there are two major things we generally try to do here. First thing is we try to sort of, influence the scope of the behavioral setting, influence the scope of the behavioral setting, such that the likelihood that the consumer will purchase our product is increased. And the likelihood that they will purchase a competitor product is right? So that's what we do. We can enhance, we can sort of orchestrate and, sort of influence the scope of the behavioral setting. What does that mean? Well, how about presentation? How about, positioning of the product? We talked about that before, right? As opposed to high, medium, low, you want sort of behavioral setting in that sense. We talked about that during our class on research, right? I'm hoping you remember that. Experiment, right? High, medium, low, so we can do that. We can use different color signages, position for signages, we can do that. Pricing strategy and all sort of feeds into it in that regard. So that is key. So that's the first thing, influence the scope of the behavioral setting, consumer behavioral setting. And secondly, we can control the reinforcement and scheduling in order to enhance a particular behavior. And so when we talk about that, what do we mean by that? Controlling the reinforcement and scheduling. That speaks to psychological learning. If any of you have had a basic course in psychology, who here has had a course in psychology? Who here had a class? 1, 2,
Manager.
only 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, only about 5 or 6 folks have had a basic course in psychology, am I right? Okay. So, when we talk about scheduling and we talk about reward and that kind of thing, what does that tap into? It taps into basic psychological aspects of learning, right? And in psychology, consumer psychology, how consumers learn is a very important thing, right? And as marketers, we have to understand how consumers learn, how memory, kind of is set up and that kind of, we won't get into that right here and now. But that's an important thing. And so when we talk about scheduling, we're talking about scheduling and organizing reinforcement, which simply is fancy words to say that what do we want to do? We want to try to reward the consumer, right? We can dispense reward to the consumer. And again, what does that do? That enhances the likelihood that they will purchase our product.
Yeah.
If a consumer is rewarded with satisfaction, is that a good thing?
Yes. It inspires
Will they
loyalty.
likely purchase our product moving forward if they are highly satisfied with our Samsung product? For sure, of course.
Inspires
And furthermore, not only, I'll say this here and now, by the way, and I'll probably say it again, not only is it important to try to enhance satisfaction, we'll talk about satisfaction in a few minutes, by the way. Not only do we want to enhance satisfaction, it's a reward that we give the consumer. Not only do we want to enhance it, but we want to propel the consumer into exceptionally high levels of satisfaction. So as marketers, not only do we want consumers to be kind of sort of happy, kind of sort of satisfied, yeah, that's for sure, as a minimum, but you know what? We want our consumers to be super duper happy, super duper satisfied. That's what we want. Extremely high level of satisfaction. That's what we want to propel our consumers into, right? And very few companies do that, by the way. But the question then arises, well, why do we want to do that? Why do we want to do that? Well, it's at that very, very high level of satisfaction that we call delight. It's the word that Warren Buffett, anybody heard of Warren Buffett here?
Yeah.
That's the word that Buffett uses also, by the way, and it originates from the researcher of service marketing guy Roland Ross. So what is delight to the consumer? It's all about propelling the consumer into that exceptionally high level of satisfaction. So we want to delight the consumer. Anyway, why do we want to do that? Why? And I'll tell you why. The reason why is because that zone of delight is where real loyalty exists. Okay? The consumer who is dissatisfied, certainly there's no loyalty there. They'll slip in the heart. Mere satisfaction, not so much. But if we want to develop loyal customers, and that's what I'm saying we do, that is how we build long-term high loyalty. Right? So that's the thinking we bring to bear. We'll talk more about that later in the course of the day. So that is important. Satisfaction. What is satisfaction anyway? What is satisfaction? Satisfaction is an attitude like post-purchase evaluative judgment. That's what satisfaction is. It's an attitude like post-purchase evaluative judgment on the product. That's what satisfaction is. And so that's what we want to do. Are we good? Say it again? Yeah. So satisfaction is an attitude like post-purchase evaluative judgment. That's what satisfaction is. And it's good to capture that, right? Because I mean, it's like anything else, right? In marketing, that's the thing in marketing and consumer behavior, by the way, and you're quite right to ask me to repeat it. That's good for you. You know, in marketing, given its very youthful kind of immaturity, so to speak, from a disciplinary perspective, you know, in marketing, we use the same words and phrases that we use in our everyday vernacular. You know, disciplines like medicine, dentistry, law, you know, they have specific words that are specific and unique to their respective disciplines. In marketing, we use the same words that we use every day. So words like satisfaction, you can ask intent, satisfaction, attitude, all that. You know, we could use consumer, we could ask any 10-year-old what those words are. You know, you can ask any 10-year-old what satisfaction, what's a customer. Would they be able to tell you? Yeah, absolutely, 100% they'd be able to tell you what it is. However, would it be the meaning of those words that we ascribe here within a marketing context? Probably not, here in our CHA. So we ascribe a particular meaning to these words that we use every day. So it's important to get it straight. So, yeah. So ultimately, those are the two very broad marketing strategic kind of goals that we seek to attain. And here then I revert back to the same question that I asked you. How do we do it?
Must understand the consumer.
That's how we do it. And again, don't take my word for it, that's fundamentally what Jobs said, right? So when we talk about, consumer behavior, I'm gonna show you a slide here, don't freak out and panic, okay? No panicking allowed, just stay calm. I'm gonna show you a little slide here and I will explain it to you. It's a very simple little slide, kind of busy, but it's a very simple kind of slide. That is how we think of consumer behavior. So what are we saying here, essentially? All we are saying is that, and listen closely to what I'm saying, all we are saying here is that when we talk about consumer behavior, really then it is fundamentally about understanding the consumer in terms of the 5-stage decision-making process. So what are we saying? At the core of consumer behavior as a discipline is the 5-stage decision-making process. The 5-stage decision-making process, right? So that's at the core. And furthermore, we recognize that, is that all? No, there are other things that occur too. There are other things that impact that 5-stage decision-making process. And we have them organized under 4 major headings here, 4 major rubrics. The first one is very individual, micro, psychological things like individual learning, individual perception, individual attitude formation, individual learning, their behavior, their lifestyle, their personality, and that kind of a thing, right? After this class, I'll be teaching personality, in fact, in my undergrad. But yeah, personality, these are all individual, micro-level kind of things, right? You get that?
Yeah.
But that ain't all, right? What else exists? What else exists? What is another major set of things that impact that 5-stage decision-making process?
The environment.
Things like broadly socio-cultural things, right?
Yeah.
Here we're talking about the impact of other consumers during the process. The impact of culture, society, societal norms, the impact of reference groups, all those kind of things impact that 5-stage decision-making process. Right, so we have individual things, we have sociological, sociocultural, more broad, macro level kind of things. Right, 2 categories. And then the third category of things that impact that 5-stage process are situational things, right? Time of day, whereabouts, retailer, online, whatever, time of day, all those kind of things, right? Situational things, right? What about physical environment and all that kind of thing? That impacts, right? And then lastly, and certainly not least,
Marketing.
the marketing mix, the marketing kind of efforts, right? The way we price, the way we communicate, the way we do all that marketing stuff, right? So all that impacts that 5-stage decision-making process. So here then, what we need to be clear about is that 5-stage decision-making process, which is at the core of what consumer behavior is all about. So what is that 5-stage process? A problem arises, stimulated by a need, if you will, right? So that's the first thing that arises. Secondly, what happens? The consumer will seek information in order to try to fulfill that need. What will they do with that information? They'll organize that information into ultimately a set of contenders, a set from which a purchase decision will be made, right? So what do? They evaluate that information in terms of a set of options or alternatives that they create. That's the third stage, right? They evaluate. And the 4th stage is what?
Decision.
They go out and they make that purchase, right? When am I gonna do it? Am I gonna wait? Am I gonna wait till the fall? Am I gonna do it next year? All part of that decision, right? Am I gonna do it right away? Do I go online? Do I go bricks and mortar? How does all that play out, right? That's the 4th stage. And then lastly, we have 5th stage,
Behavior.
which is post-purchase behavior. So the consumer's made the purchase, and then they start thinking about it, right? Start using it. Consumption or usage occurs, they start thinking about it, right? And there's some very, very important things that arise out of that. Very, very important things, we'll talk about that. Okay, so the 5-stage process, and we'll unpack each one of these 5 stages momentarily, and we will unpack each one of these 5 stages within the framework of the group what, where, when. That's how we will approach it. So starting off, and like I said, when we talk about customer analysis, it's all about the W5, right? So let's talk about that. Let's start off by talking about who. Who are our customers, right? That's a key thing, as Rob said. So we must understand our customers. By the way, when we talk about our customers, here's an important point too. Are we just talking about our current customers? No. Who else are we talking about? We're talking about our
Potential future customers.
Potential customers. We're talking about conceivably, we're talking about competitors' customers, right? Does Coke is Coke interested in Pepsi's customers? Big time. Is Toyota interested in getting Hyundai's customers? Yeah, right? So competitor customers. And if that wasn't all, we're also interested in what about customers who have left us, our former customers? Can we get them back? So it all feeds into this notion of trying to retain customers, customer retention, and all that kind of stuff, right? Because as an aside, we all know that old adage, right? The old adage is that, it's far cheaper to retain a customer than it is to get new customers. We know. So we recognize that. So that is the key thing that we want to recognize. So as we seek to understand the consumer, then, consistent with what we've spoken about before, how can we do that? How can we do that? By engaging in research. And we had that whole session a while ago on research, right? How do we get that information? It's all about engaging in research and executing all of the things we spoke about in that session. Right? So you see how everything sort of ties together here? And we build on everything. It's kind of cool, right? So that's how we do it. Furthermore, as we seek to understand the consumer, getting back to the point that I made before on this notion of segmentation, we recognize that segmentation is that very unique marketing kind of function. And then we say, okay, well, in order to really understand the consumer and, engage in research and do all that kind of stuff, we need to fundamentally then ultimately engage in segmentation. So then the question becomes, okay, well, that's all kind of cool. What is segmentation? Well, segmentation, simply put, is where we break down that mass market into identifiable groups. That's what segmentation is all about. We take that big cloud out there, that big mass market, what do? We break it down into identifiable groups. Okay, and I will say something now, and I'll say it again. Okay, so we break down into these groups, and then what do we do? What do we do now? We have them, right? We have the whole mass market broken down into those groups. Now what do we do as marketers?
We choose the most,
then
select
the segments
we want to
on
target.
which we are going to focus our marketing efforts on. Right? And therefore, that segment or that segments becomes known as the
Target demographic.
target market. So that's what we want to do, right? Why do we want to break down why do we want to engage in segmentation? Why? It's an awful lot of work. It's a very expensive process. It's a big thing. It's a big deal. Why do we want to do it? Well, the reason why is because we must tailor our marketing efforts accordingly to those consumers, to those particular consumers. You know what? Not every consumer wants to buy a Big Mac.
Yeah.
Not every consumer wants to drive a Toyota Corolla. They never will. They are just not in. So do we want to try to convince them? No, we don't, right? So therefore, we need to figure that out, and segmentation allows us to do that, right? So segmentation is key. Furthermore, as I mentioned to you before, you know what? As marketers, what do we want to do? We want to rule the world. We want to do everything, in other words. But you know what? I'm being facetious. We essentially are precluded from doing these kind of things because of available resources, right? Would we like to engage in all kinds of, Super Bowl ads and do all that kind of stuff? Well, yeah, of course we would. But, very often we are precluded from doing these kind of things because there's just not enough money for us to do it. So therefore, when we engage in segmentation, then it allows us then to focus our marketing efforts. It allows us to build efficiency and effectiveness into our marketing efforts, which is key. What's the difference between, you guys are at the back end of your session, what's your program, what's the difference between efficiency and effectiveness then?
Efficiency is
Smarty
doing the
pants.
best, the best, doing it in a very timely manner where people can be satisfied with the results of productivity. And effectiveness is doing the things in the right way.
In principle, you are absolutely correct, yeah, absolutely. So basically, when we talk about effectiveness, yeah, very good, let me put a point on it. When we talk about effectiveness, essentially it's whether we are achieving what we want to do, right? Are we being effective, yes or no? Are we meeting the objectives? That's basically what effectiveness is all about. And efficiency essentially is how well do we do it? So we can be very effective. However, in so doing, you could be exceptionally inefficient in terms of how you do it, right? So that's what like Peter Drucker described it as being, doing it versus doing it right, right? So that's the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. And so therefore, yeah, we break down that mass market into groups, and then what do? We choose the segments on which to focus our marketing efforts. So yeah, when we look at these groups, by the way, what about these groups? What about these groups? These are groups of consumers that typically seek similar benefits. They have similar buying habits. They have similar uses. And these are some of the similarities that they have, right? And that's the kind of thinking we bring to bear. So yeah, can we adopt an unfocused kind of an effort? Well, yeah, we could, but as I will again tell you in a minute, it is quite risky and inefficient and ineffective. So therefore, what do? We break down that mass market into those identifiable groups, and then we select the segments on which to focus our marketing efforts and execute our marketing plan. So that's basically what we're doing. When we talk about segmentation, there are a variety of variables that we can use to break down that mass market. There are 4 commonly understood domains or categories of variables we can use, that you see on the board. We all know and love, right? Geographic. The key thing with geographic here is location, what is important here is, we can be very, very broad geographically, or we can be very, very focused. It can be very broad, or it can be very narrow. So we could, be interested in a particular continent, a particular region of the earth. We could be a little bit more focused. We could, be more interested in southern Ontario versus northern Ontario, southern Canada versus northern Canada, rural versus urban, all geographically based. And we can get very, very narrow too. We could, in Windsor, Ontario, we could, go and select a particular street and select, say, the north side of a particular street. Right? So it can be very, very micro, very, very precise also. And as an aside, I will tell you that, very often, essentially with micro segmentation, that kind of, we essentially can segment to segments of 1, 2 rather than that. Technology allows us to do that. So, I don't want to get into this kind of details. So yeah, geographically. Demographic, another one. When we talk about demographic, what are we talking about? Those descriptors that help us understand things, right? Like what? Like yeah, income, household income, age, individual income, religion, marital status, gender, sex, etc., right? So we can do all that. So, psychographic, when we talk about psychographic, what is key here in psychographic? Think two things, personality and lifestyle. Personality and lifestyle, right? So personality is an important thing here, personality and lifestyle. Two different things, right? Personality and lifestyle. That is under the umbrella of psychographic, right? Lifestyle is all about, to think of lifestyle, you can remember AIO, activities, interests, and opinions, right? That's what lifestyle is all about. Activities, interests, and opinions. So it's a mode of behavior which is driven by consumer and personality are those innate characteristics that really inform how we behave and how we respond to the current situation. That's what personality is. So, personality and lifestyle. And of course, behavior. What are some examples of behavioral kinds of segmentation? How about something like purchase frequency, usage, all those kind of things, behavior manifestation. So there are a variety of ways by which we can do it. Is that the only way we can do it? The answer to that is yes or no. Is that the only way? Yes or no?
No.
Yeah, are those the only ways that we can do it? Yes or no? No? What are, really? Seriously? Well, what are the other ones then? A composite kind of an approach? Sure, using these, yeah, but are there other ways? No? I'm just pulling you right a little bit. Well, the answer is that there are, I would argue, an infinite number of ways by which we can segment the market. But absolutely, as you allude to, we want to typically adopt a composite kind of an approach. In other words, some of these things we want to adopt, a mix of these variables, right? For example, as I always like to tell my classes, and those of you who have other notes will see this probably from other people, but basically, if you are looking at a segment that is between ages 25 and 45, that enjoy outdoor living, that enjoy adventure and enjoy cross-country driving, that kind of a thing. Here we've tapped into a variety of those variables. That's a composite kind of approach that I have just described to you that would describe a particular segment. Right. And that would be quite appropriate for something like Jeep or Toyota 4Runner, after that kind of thing. Right? So the auto industry, for example, is just an example. So getting back to that question, is this the only way that we can do it? And the answer is no. We can adopt an infinite number of ways of segmenting where we seek to understand and describe the segment. One of which is to look at, sounds very interesting, this domain of what we call the new product consumer. The consumer then purchases technology. And here, in order to understand that, we tap into what we call diffusion of innovation theory. Diffusion of innovation theory. We use a lot of research. And diffusion of innovation theory is very interesting too, because basically, just by, as an aside, it stems from the work of a guy named Everett Rogers, who qualitatively looked at how consumers adopt new technology and new products. That comes out of his work in the early 60s, about 1962 or so. And then subsequently, a guy named Frank Bass quantified it into a very mathematically elegant kind of an approach in 1969. So not only is diffusion of innovation theory sound, qualitatively, it also is very, very well researched and well described mathematically, quantitatively. So essentially, what we're saying then, the principle here is that, when a new product is introduced into the marketplace, or new technology, not all consumers will instantly run out and purchase it. That just doesn't happen, right? How does it happen? It spreads through society. It spreads through. So what do we see? We see those adoptions that start off, that build up, and then they taper off. So it's that nice, generally that nice bell-shaped, normalized kind of a curve that emerges, generally speaking. And so the notion here then behind diffusion of innovation theory is that, yeah, like I said, not all consumers will instantly run out and buy it. So then the question is, well, what really stimulates them to buy it? Word of mouth is a fundamental thing that stimulates something. So new product adoptions are fundamentally driven by many things, not the least of which is word of mouth and word of mouth information. And as a word of mouth researcher, it's particularly interesting to researchers like me in that domain. So what does that look like then? You will see this in your textbook, by the way. So we have these call them adoption categories. And so essentially, when we look at that curve, as I've just described to you, according to diffusion of innovation theory, we have that curve and all of the consumers, that summation, if you will, of consumers over time. We have all that summation of consumers categorized under 5 major categories. The first one, 2.5% of adoptees, is called innovators. And innovators are very interesting too. We'll talk about that momentarily. We also have what we call early adopters. We have early majority. We have late majority. And lastly, we have
Laggards.
Right? We might have heard these terms before. So innovators are especially interesting. Well, they're all interesting, but the point here is that when we look at each one of those 5 major categories here, interestingly, from a personality perspective, they all possess some common personality traits. That's the point that I want to share with you. So each one of these categories here, in diffusion of innovation theory, each one of these categories that are so named here, we find that the consumer, generally, the consumers that are in each one of these categories share common personality traits, and that's an interesting thing for us, right? So how does that relate to segmentation? It means then that we can segment the market based on diffusion of innovation theory here and focus our marketing efforts on a particular segment as defined here, if that is what we want to do. Is it related to psychographic? Yeah, absolutely. It's related to behavioral, related to all those things. But my point here is that we need to think big, right? In terms of how we segment the market. That's the point. So innovators are very interesting there because, innovators, what about these guys? These are the folks that will, getting back to what we were talking about with your iPad, for example, these are the folks who will camp out at an Apple store for like 4 days to get that newest iPad, right? These are innovators. Furthermore, they are also influencers. Innovators are often, the YouTube folks that will do the reviews, they're the person. So these are the people who are, desperate to get that product first up for a variety of reasons. They want to do it. And they also enjoy what we call opinion leadership. They enjoy being the go-to people for product information. They love it. They love when people come to them and say, what about this, what about that? And they say, what about this? They love that kind of opinion leadership, right? So they love that kind of thing. Interestingly also, they are not price sensitive. Right? They're perfectly willing to pay thousands of dollars for that brand new iPad. No problem there, right? So they're not price sensitive.
But sometimes they are sponsored by the company.
Well, yeah, they're all kinds of things. Yeah, but we're talking general. Yeah, but then you're getting involved, when you're talking about what you're talking about, brand ambassadors and all that kind of thing. Right, innovative. And then, of course, at the back end, we have the laggards, right? And these are the laggards, they will reject that technology. They don't want to get involved in it. These are the folks who will continue to use their rotary dial phones, right?
Yeah.
You guys know what a rotary dial phone is?
Yeah.
You ever used one? You ever seen one?
Yeah, the landlines.
Landline, yeah.
Yeah,
You ever
exactly.
used one? Yeah. You know what? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? You know? Your great grandma's house, right? Whoever you call it. So, yeah. And who are those folks, by the way? Those are laggards. They don't want to, they will reject it until they have no choice but to adopt it, right? So we have those. So it's interesting to look at it from that perspective too. So the bottom line here is that when we look at those segments need to fulfill some fundamental basic criteria here. They absolutely should be separate from each other, for sure. In other words, they should absolutely be distinctive, you know, obviously. Whatever we want to measure should be measurable, absolutely. You know, and that's a point I've said it before, and I will say it again, very important in business. You know, if you take nothing away from this program, please do take risks all the way. And a lot of people say it, and I will repeat it, and that is that, you know, in business, it is worth doing, and we need to do it, but it's also worth measuring. So in other words, key thing or another, anything you do business, think measure. Always think measurement. So that's the key thing. So whatever we want to do, it has to be measurable. It also has to be big enough to warrant our efforts, right? In other words, it has to be substantial. And it does nothing to have these wonderful segments if we cannot access it. So yeah, we could identify a wonderful segment that potentially can be very profitable for us in northern Canada, in Yellowknife, for example, or other parts of northern Canada. But unless we have a way of accessing it, I don't know it's a good one. So therefore, it has to be accessible. So we recognize those two things. So to sort of state it alternately, when we talk about a segment being distinctive, we recognize then that those segments should be, as we say, homogeneous within, but heterogeneous between. Okay? So heteros differences, you mean differences between. Homo is similarity, so homogeneous within similarities within. So you recognize that. I've always spoken about size. Also, potential growth too. It's another key thing that we want to consider, right? What about the growth? Is growth important to us? You know, what is the potential for growth is a key thing. You know, importantly also, we want to consider, like we do always, and we'll talk about this next class in a bit more detail, but what about the competition? What is the competition doing within the segment that interests us? Is that segment already saturated by the competition? It's a consideration. We need to think about it, right? If we want to, for example, if we want to introduce a new cola into the marketplace, you know, is that, you know, a viable kind of decision to make? Well, maybe not, because, you know, the market and that segment that we might be focusing on might be saturated with Coke and Pepsi and the no-name colas, right? So we might want to think about it. So the bottom line here is we need to consider what is the competition doing within the segment, another key consideration. Obviously, as I said, it has to be identifiable. We need to access it, as I said, and, you know, given that fundamentally we're interested in profitability, what about financially? Can we access it financially? You know, what are the financial implications associated with it? So the cost, in other words, right? How costly is it? It goes without saying that, you know, to access, you know, a segment in northern Canada, well, let me tell you, it's a hell of a lot more expensive to access that kind of a segment than in, say, southern Canada, in Windsor, Ontario, for example, right? For all the obvious reasons. So those are key things. Compatibility is an important thing too. You know, when we talk about compatibility, the segment should be, and the composition of the segment should be compatible with our own overall corporate strategy and relatedly our own brand strategy, right? So compatibility is very, very important. So as an example of that, I mean, do you think then that Apple will go after a bunch in terms of a segment? Are they trying to focus their marketing efforts, Apple, on a bunch of 90-year-olds?
No.
Is that a demographic segment that is compatible with the Apple strategy? Obviously not. Yeah. Because, and why is that? Because the Apple brand is very much branded as a brand that is highly innovative, cutting edge, sleek, seductive, elegant, sexy. That's the Apple brand, right? And the products are very sexy, very seductive, right? Very elegant, right? It's all part of the thing. So yeah, do a bunch of 95-year-olds, are they interested in? Obviously not, right? However, not so much for others. Okay, so those are all key things. So what then are some of the major benefits of this process of segmentation? Well, it helps us to understand the consumers. It helps us to identify those potential opportunities that exist when we engage in this process. It enables us to fundamentally, as we said before, target those segments on which we want to focus our marketing efforts. And again, it enables us to build in that focus, if you will, that focus, that tailoring of marketing efforts, which is very, very important, right? So there are a lot of benefits, right? All basically ensuring or facilitating effectiveness and efficiency, as we were talking about. Let's have a look at an example. So for those of you, has anybody heard of a major global company called Monsanto? Monsanto was fairly recently purchased by the German pharmaceutical conglomerate called Bayer, by the way, but Monsanto. So Monsanto has a bad reputation on the planet. They were extensively engaged in GMO and a bunch of things like that, and lawsuits and that kind of thing. Lawsuits surrounding this product that they make called Roundup, by the way. So it's a whole thing that we won't get into now, but anyway. They make a product called Roundup. So what is Roundup? Roundup is a herbicide. It's a chemical that we can buy. You know, you and I, we can go to Canadian Tire right now and buy some Roundup, and we can take it back to our home. And if we have grass or weeds or something growing in the cracks of our driveway, we just take the product, we spray it on, within a few days it's dead, it's all good, right? That's what Roundup does. Now, when we talk about Roundup as a herbicide, it's very beneficial not only for us as consumers in our house, but it's also beneficial and highly used also, by the way, at an industrial level, in an agricultural industrial level, namely that farmers, and I know this is 100% accurate what I'm saying, farmers in the springtime after the snow goes, what happens in their fields, right? A bunch of weeds and residual crops and crap starts growing in the weeds, right? So what do? They want to get rid of all this crop that has emerged after the snow goes, right? So what will they do before they put the fresh seed in the ground? Before they plow and do that? They want to get rid of all this crap that's growing up, right? And what do? They use the Roundup product. So they will take that product and they will blanket the field in Roundup. And the benefit is that it has a fairly short half-life. So, within a week or two, within a few weeks, within a very short period of time, anyway, after application, all the things will die, and it basically dispenses. It just goes away. Very short half-life. That's the benefit of Roundup in this context, generally speaking. So, what they do then is that they'll do it, all the stuff, apply it, all the stuff dies, and then they put the plow, they put the seed in the ground, and all is good. Right? That's the basis. So the point here that I'm making is that folks like you and me, we can go to Canadian Tire and buy consumers. And also there's another segment, the industrial segment. Are you with me? So we have two segments here, the industrial segment and the consumer segment. Two segments that the brand focuses on. So let's have a look at those. So yeah, we have the industrial segment, which purchases a product at about $8 or so a liter. They'll dilute it, which leads to generally an applied price of about 10 cents a liter, right? Generally speaking, just generally. Conversely, we have folks like you and me that can go to Canadian Tire, we can buy it from consumers, the consumer segment, different segment now, us. And we can buy it, and we can buy it for about 10 cents, $10 a liter or so. It's ready to use. We can just go buy it, buy a liter of it, use it, it'll last us years, and it's all good, right? So that leads to an applied price of about $10 or so a liter. And by the way, because Monsanto has such a bad reputation generally, typically, you will not see Monsanto's name on the brand, on the product, on the packaging. You will see the US-based fertilizer company, Scotts. Scotts does, on behalf of Monsanto, Scotts does the marketing efforts for the product in North America and Canada. So what essentially do we see here? This brings me to the point here. And that is, we see an example, a real-life example of a very well-known brand, very well-known product that is marketed to two different, very broad segments. That's the point. And to market to each of the segments, they use a very specific marketing mix configuration for each of the segments. So each segment then demands generally its own unique marketing kind of configuration, marketing mix configuration. And that's the point that I'm making, right? Which you might want to remember also, when we talked about international marketing, the essential strategic issue was, standardization versus customization. Right?
Yeah.
So in this instance, what are we doing? We are customizing our marketing mix to each segment here domestically, right? So that is a real life example. So yeah, we can adopt, a very unfocused kind of a strategy, but that's a high risk kind of move, right? Very high risk move for all of the reasons we spoke about. But what do we want to do? We typically want to engage in that segmentation process and determine what segments we want to focus our marketing efforts on. So that brings us then to essentially the first stage in the consumer decision-making process, and that is the problem recognition, whereby a need arises, right? So the first question we want to ask ourselves then is, what exactly is a need and how does a need arise, right? So you tell me how a need arises. How does a need arise? Oh, look me on the eyes. You don't need to look me. Tell me, look me in the eyes. You tell me, how does a need arise? Right, okay, like how? How does a need, generally speaking, how does a need arise?
The absence of something.
The absence of something.
The shortage.
Okay.
The absence.
You need food, yeah,
To fulfill something.
sure. Okay, fair enough. What else? Yeah. Sure. Yeah. How about something like, as you say in marketing, well, everything you're saying is correct, by the way. Very good. But what else? How about something, a fancy word that we like to use in marketing, is what we call depleted assortment, which is a fancy word of saying we run out of something, right? So, I go to use my toothpaste and it's run out. Therefore, the need arises then for me too, right? And so, depleted assortment is a major thing. Marketing efforts, you see an ad and you say, ooh, wow, ooh, this is good. I never look at this Samsung iPad that I can blah, 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 do this, do that. You know what? I think I really need that. Right? We become seduced by that product, right? Or I see on, what happened to me a few days ago, an Instagram feed where the person came up and said, oh, all these books on this subject, there are 4 books that I would recommend on this particular subject. Boom, 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 and I look and say, so I go online, I buy it, I get it the next day. For $20. I don't know, 5 or 6 bucks that I buy. Right? So marketing efforts are key, right? So marketing efforts, depleted assortment, I don't know, whatever. Right? So it can be triggered by these triggers, is what I'm saying. But when we look at a need from a psychological perspective, what actually is a need? A need, simply put, is a difference between an ideal state and an actual state. That's what a need is. So if, maybe on an exam or something, I would say, what's a need? You know, that is what a need is all about. And it can be triggered by what we just discussed. So, you know, take this, for example. I go to use a pen, and the pen has run out of ink. Guess what? What's the actual situation? The actual situation then is that I cannot write, I cannot use my pen. That's the actual situation. What is the ideal situation? That I do have a pen. I go to get into my truck, the engine explodes, guess what? I do not have a truck, I don't have a car, I don't have transportation. That's the actual state. What's the ideal state? Right? And so that difference, if you will, is what a need is all about. That's what a need is. So I'll say it again, a need then is really that difference, if you will, between an actual state and an ideal state. Right? That's how we want to think of needs, which are very important in our life, right? Needs. So that's how we want to think of it. And so fundamentally, we recognize, as I said, consumers buy benefits. So it's about what benefits we can bring to the consumer. Right? And so we recognize then that generally speaking, different segments seek different benefits. Right? So our focus then should be on a particular segment that has a set of benefits that are very similar. Therefore, we can move forward accordingly, right? Now, when we talk about needs, and I'll make this point and then we will break for 10 minutes. When we, unless you want to keep on going, you want to keep on going?
No.
You want to keep on going?
No.
Yes.
No.
You want a break?
No.
Yes.
Yes. Want a break?
Okay, so we'll continue then, okay?
That's a need.
You don't want a break?
Want a break? We need a break.
Yeah.
What's the ideal situation? You get a break. What's the actual situation? You're not gonna get a break. I'm just kidding. Okay, so let me just finish off 30 seconds and then we'll okay, so whenever we talk about needs, and it's worth mentioning, okay, from a consumer psychological perspective, I would be highly remiss if I did not at least mention this. In marketing and consumer psychology and psychology, whenever we talk about needs, we always talk about the work of Abraham Maslow.
Yeah.
The work of Abraham Maslow, coming from his work in 1943, to be precise, where he researched and organized and identified a whole lot of needs. And the way that the elegance and the beauty behind his work, which is not without criticism, by the way, but anyway, his work is that he suggested that there were 5 major categories of needs that he hierarchically arranged, ranging from the very bottom, most basic biogenic set of needs that he called physiological needs, ranging all the way up to the highest category of needs that he called self-actualization, and so on and so forth. And so when we talk about physiological needs, these are the basic needs, hunger, thirst, that kind of a thing, and it ranges all the way up to self-actualization, which essentially is Are you fulfilling your capacity to do it? Are we being all that we can be? Are we, fulfilling our life kind of ambitions here, right? And all you can be, all you can be. That's what self-actualization is all about. Right, in a nutshell. And I think you can probably read more about that in the section. So let's talk about that, all right? Kind of go through all the concepts, right? So yeah, it's good. So, from a marketing perspective, yeah, it's cool. It's good. It's nice to know that. We like these kind of hierarchical frameworks. It's good. It's helpful. It helps us to, compare various needs and the relative importance on the part of the person. So it's good and it's helpful. We like that. Okay, so with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, let us take 10 minutes. So right now, it's 24 minutes. 24 minutes.
Let's go. Let's go.
You feel like a new woman? Between us girls, you feel like a new woman? All good? Huh? Okay, so let us proceed then and let us continue talking about this. So, needs. We just spoke about needs. Do we need to turn that air off so we can hear okay? Yes or no? Tell me. Tell me. Yes? Off? Yes?
No.
Okay. Okay. So loud. Okay, so needs. We left off with talking about Maslow, and then we get that. Now, yes, it's a little old. I took this screenshot many years ago. Okay, but the reason why I bring this up is very simple. The key thing, and this sort of depicts the point that I want to make. Now, consistent right from the beginning in this class, one of the key things that we have been emphasizing is that from a consumer perspective, consumers don't buy, they buy
Benefits.
right. And so therefore, what does that mean? So what? What does that mean? Well, it means this. From a marketing perspective then, generally speaking, I'm generalizing, from a marketing perspective, that means then that if we communicate with the consumer, recognizing that they buy benefits, recognizing that benefits are critically important, what then does that mean for us? It means that we have to convey to the consumer the benefits that they will get from purchasing said product. That's the thing, right? So there are different appeals, from an advertising perspective, a marketing communicative perspective. There are a variety of appeals that we can use, right? One under sort of more of a rational, informational kind of an appeal, and there are a variety of different types of appeals. But one rational, informational appeal we can use is what we call an attribute benefit, kind of feature benefit kind of an appeal. And that's what we see here. So what are we saying here? What we are doing for the consumer here is that we are mapping on the benefits that accrue to the consumer from the features. That's what we're doing. So we're saying to the consumer, here are all the benefits that you get from this product. So, really, when you think about it, is the consumer really interested in the rubber depth tire, the rubber, the configuration of the tread, the color of the wall of the tire? Is the consumer really? No, not really. What the consumer is really focused on are the benefits, right? Like, what about the quiet ride, the comfort of the ride, stopping distance, snow handling, mud handling, wet weather handling, fuel economy, safety action. These are benefits that accrue to the consumer from the tire. And those are benefits, and that really is what the consumer is interested in purchasing, right? So it's those functional benefits that really they are purchasing here, okay? So that is key. So when we look at that, we can now sort of transition. We spoke about needs. Now we can say, okay, well, how do they proceed now? Well, here now, we've identified the need, the consumer has identified the need, that first stage, and then what do? They then start searching for information in order to fulfill or satisfy those needs. Okay? So that's where we are right now. So we're essentially at the second stage of that 5-stage decision-making process. So they search for information. So the need arises, so then the question is, how do they search for information? Well, it basically, in a nutshell, works in a 2-stage kind of a process. First, they go internal. In other words, they tap into their existing expertise, their existing knowledge, their existing experience. And when that fails, what do? They go external. They go external. And then they talk to other consumers, they solicit word of mouth, they go online, they get all this information external to themselves, right? So my truck, explodes, difference between an ideal actual state and concept, so then what do? So then I initially revert to my existing knowledge and expertise, and say, okay, well, I know what this and that and that, okay, I know all that, but you know what, I'm really not current on the current features and benefits that other brands could offer, so I go external and I start searching for other information. Consumer reports, online searches, YouTube, assessment, all that kind of stuff, right? So that is key, and that's kind of how that works. It is also worth noting that, and one trend that we see, this has come out fairly strongly in some of my research, by the way, online. When we look at online consumer behavior, we recognize that the consumer attention span online has progressively shortened over time. So over the last 10, 15 years or so, we know that the online attention span on the part of the consumer has gone from about 12 seconds to like about 7 seconds. The attention span. So we are operating from a marketing perspective on a progressively shortening attention span on the part of the consumer. Are you with me here? Right? So attention. So what does that mean? If we recognize then that the consumer, especially online, has a very shortened attention span, we know, what does that mean? We need to grab their attention up front. So in other words, as soon as they jump into our landing page here, what must we do? We need to grab them. We need to grab their attention. And we find, research indicates that when we do capture their attention right up front, it basically, depending on the numbers we look at, it does result in a substantially higher, what we say, conversion rate at the back end of their online consumer journey. So they jump into our website, what do we want? We want to capture them right away, and we want to lead them on the customer journey, ultimately resulting, ideally, in a sale. That's what we want to do, right? And we find that when we do capture them up front, it can, increase the probability of, or increase the conversion rate of upwards of 70–80%. So it can be quite beneficial in that regard. So then the question emerges, how best can we capture the consumer up front? And I always say one of the major ways is by using video. We can use video up front on our landing page, a very short video, doesn't have to be long, but that's the whole thing, it's not how long it is. But typically, just a short video, moving pictures, which will grab the consumer, which is especially important given that we only have a very small window to work in. So anyway, that's the kind of thinking that as marketers we bring to bear. So anyway, getting back to the point here, we search for information, we start internal, and then we go external. Is that clear?
Yes.
So we do that. Anything else I wanted to say on that? Yeah. Okay. So we search for information, right? Internal, as I've described, and then we go external, we get all that information. What then happens during this process? What then happens? We then organize that information, and we organize it into several sets of contenders, if you will, several sets of elements of information. And there are numerous sets that emerge. However, here, for our purposes, I want to highlight one set, and that is what we call the consideration set, which for our purposes we can also call, there are nuanced differences, but for our purposes we call it simply an evoked set. So an evoked set. So we categorize, the consumer will categorize that information into what we call an evoked set. And that evoked set consists of those brands or products from which the consumer will make a purchase decision. Right? Evoked set or consideration set. So that's an important point, right? Well, everything I'm saying is very important. That's critical, right? As we seek to understand how this works. And so what would be an example of that then? Well, let's say I keep giving you this example. My truck explodes, I don't have transportation, right? Ideal, actual, ideal is that I do have a new truck, I do have transportation, actual I don't. What do? Get information. So I initially go internal, revert to my existing memory, knowledge, experience. When that fails, I go external, and then talk to other people, go online, etc., right? And then I get all that information. And then what do? I categorize. Right? I categorize it into, what did I say? Our consideration set. And that is the set, again, of both brands or products from which I will make a purchase. So, in keeping with this example, right, I go online, I read consumer reports, I see YouTube videos, and a bunch of other sources of information. And then I talk to salespeople, go out to test drive, blah, 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 do all that. And then I categorize all that information into a set of vehicles. F-150, Dodge Ram 1500, Chevrolet Silverado, GMC Sienna, Toyota, what's the Toyota truck again? Tacoma, Nissan Titan. Right? So I have however many, how many did I say, 5? So I have 5 or 6. So the point here then is that out of those brands, those products that emerged out of my search for information, I will make a decision. I will make a decision. I will withdraw. I will purchase one of those items. Right? And that emerges from categorizing all the information. Yeah. So then we say, okay, well that's all kind of cool. That's all kind of cool. But then I've already listed these options, these alternatives. How do I evaluate the options? How do I evaluate those alternatives? Is the key. Well, typically the consumer will use what we call a multi-attribute model. And a multi-attribute model, there are a variety of ways by which we can, the consumer will do it, by the way. Generally speaking, they'll use a version of the multi-attribute model. And so what does that mean? Well, generally speaking, conceptually, what the multi-attribute model suggests is that the consumer will evaluate each one of those elements within the consideration set along, here's the point, along some key attributes. So in other words, what is important for me as I seek to identify the benefits? What are the important attributes for me when I'm buying a new vehicle? Well, let's list some of those major attributes. Let's say
reliability.
Price can be an attribute too. So let's say price, comfort, diesel carrying capacity, safety rating, fuel economy. Those 6 attributes are important, right? And then we say, okay, well, out of those 6, what is really, really important? Pursuant to the multi-attribute model, I will weigh, as a highly price-sensitive consumer myself, I I will weigh, let's say 50% of my weight will be attributed to price. And let's say for fuel economy, fuel carrying capacity, and the other ones, let's say 10% each. Right? So therefore, I will weigh each one of those brands along those weighted attributes, whereby price will get a lot of weight. Right? So that conceptually is how we do it, generally. Now, is it a quantitative paper and pencil calculator exercise? Well, no, 99% of the time, no, it doesn't. But generally speaking, that's the kind of thinking that people are doing. So, yeah. They will do it knowingly or unknowingly, but that's how they do it. Knowingly or unknowingly. Usually unknowingly, that's right? Okay, are we good? So then what happens? Out of assessing each one of those options, those alternatives, what will we do? We will arrive at a
conclusion or decision.
That's what we will do. We will arrive at the option that we will select. And so then I say, okay, what happens then? That brings us to the fourth stage, where I say, okay, this is the vehicle that I'm going to buy for these reasons. So therefore, am I going to go today, or am I going to wait a month, or am I going to wait for my next paycheck, or am I going to wait until next fall, until, you know, the promos at the auto manufacturers bring? How am I going to do it? Am I going to purchase it online? Am I going to go to a bricks and mortar? What dealership am I going to? All that is associated with the actual purchase once I decide what I'm going to purchase. Right? Fourth stage. Which brings us to the last stage, the fifth and last stage of the decision-making process, which is what we call
Post-purchase evaluation.
Post-purchase stage, the fifth and last stage. Now, when we talk about the fifth and last stage, post-purchase behavior, I want you to think of three things here, and this is key. First thing is an assessment of satisfaction. Second thing is, following from that, the extent to which word of mouth will occur. Very important, word of mouth. And then the third aspect is cognitive dissonance. Okay, so there are three things that you need to sort of nail down. So let's talk about those. Three things associated with post-purchase behavior. So, first thing, what was the first thing that I said?
Assessment of satisfaction.
Satisfaction. Okay, so I made that purchase now. I start using it, I'm engaged in post-purchase behavior. What did I say the first thing was? An assessment of satisfaction. And at the front end of today's class, we talked about satisfaction. What did we say satisfaction was? We said it's everything. What did I say it was? An attitude like post-purchase evaluation. That's what satisfaction is all about. So the question now becomes, okay, and we've already reckoned it from a marketing perspective. I said at the outset, what do we want? We want our consumers to be super duper highly satisfied, don't we?
Yeah.
So then we say, okay, well, you know, how does this satisfaction thing work then? How does it work? Well, in order to understand satisfaction, we need to understand the theoretical approach that we call expectation theory. So when I say the word satisfaction, the immediate thing that should pop into your mind is expectation theory. Satisfaction, expectation theory. So get that connection set up right away. Fundamental to marketing, here, what I'm talking about. Frankly, everything that I'm telling you is fundamental to marketing. Right? It's not like I'm making this stuff up just for fun here. Right? So so the question then becomes, how do we assess satisfaction? Well, pursuant to expectation theory, the consumer will assess satisfaction based on a comparison of the outcome that they experienced during consumption, based on that outcome as it compares to their expectations. So expectations become very important. So what does that mean then? That means, and here I will assume that you can all see it, I tried lifting it and it sinks down again, like everything else that's on factor. So let's sketch this out here. Expectation theory. We have an expectation. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes? Yes? You? Can you see this? So we have expectations, right? Pre-purchase, pre-consumption expectations. And then when we purchase it, we start to use it, we engage in usage, and then what happens, we have an outcome. Right? So I buy a new truck and I think that, yeah, I think it's gonna be good. I think it's gonna be comfortable. I think it's okay. I think it'll be good, you know? That's my, what am I describing? My expectations. And by the way, how do we develop those expectations? Expectations comes from experience, prior knowledge, you know? Experience, that kind of thing. That's where expectations come from. Marketing efforts, absolutely, and those kind of things. Okay, so we have expectations. Now, what did I just describe? I think that my new vehicle is going to be okay. I think it's going to be good, you know? Those are my expectations. But I start using it, and guess what? It is super duper comfortable. It is really nice handling. You know, it is just a magnificent vehicle that I am describing. What have I just described? What have I just described? I've described a scenario where the outcome is bigger, smaller than...
bigger than the expectations.
Way bigger.
Substantial.
So we have a situation where the outcome exceeds the expectations. So therefore, are those expectations being confirmed or no? Well, actually, there is a disconfirmation process that is occurring in a very positive way. They're being surpassed. They're not just being met. They're not just being confirmed. They are being surpassed. So that results in what we call a disconfirmation. And in this sense, what did I just describe? It is a positive disconfirmation that exists, which results in, what do you think that'll be in terms of the result or effect on an assessment of satisfaction?
Loyalty.
High, medium, or low?
High.
This positive disconfirmation will result in very high satisfaction. From a marketing perspective, that's what we want. Right? We want to, and then of course it raises the question, well, how technically do we do it? There's a way by which we do it and everything else that we won't get into now. But yeah, so we have that. Conversely, I think my vehicle is going to perform well, but you know what? I buy it, I start using it, and you know what? It's broken all the time. It's in the shop. It's not as comfortable as I thought it would be. What am I describing here? I'm describing a situation where the outcome is less than the expectation, which results in disconfirmation again. But this is a negative disconfirmation. And what does that result in?
Low satisfaction.
Or dissatisfaction. Conversely, I get my expectations. I think it'll be okay. And yeah, we get confirmation. And that will result in what? Moderate satisfaction. Moderate satisfaction. What do we call all this? Expectation theory. And that is how satisfaction generally works. There are a variety of models that we can use, by the way, but that is certainly the prevalent kind of model that we sort of subscribe to. So that's how satisfaction works. So here, I'm assuming you can all see that okay? It's all good, yes?
Yeah.
Any questions on that? Okay, are we good, everybody?
Yes,
Get
bro.
that? Yes? Easy peasy, right? So that is key. So that is an assessment of satisfaction. Now, following on from satisfaction is, as we call it, an antecedent verbal. It drives a whole bunch of things, right? Now, that therefore brings me to the second major kind of consideration for purchase behavior that I always, as a word of mouth, I always emphasize, and that is, what about the extent to which the consumer will engage in word of mouth? Well, word of mouth largely is driven by satisfaction. And so therefore, what are we saying here? What are we saying? We're saying then that, and I'll just come right out and say it, under conditions of high satisfaction and under conditions of dissatisfaction or low satisfaction, the consumer likelihood of engaging in word of mouth will be maximized, more so than just mere satisfaction. Right? So if we were to draw that on a graph and we look at word of mouth, we look at satisfaction, let's call it low, medium, and high. What did I just say? Word of mouth, we're not looking at it from a dichotomous perspective here. Good or bad, negative, positive, we're not looking at that. We're just looking at the extent to which you're going to be talking, right? So under condition of low satisfaction and high satisfaction, they are going to be engaged in considerably more satisfaction than moderate word of mouth than moderate satisfaction. So what does the curve look like here? Huh? Who said you?
Rising.
Yeah, you, right? A U-shape. Yeah, absolutely. Which is a very prominent kind of relationship that we have in marketing. So we have a lot of U relationships, like the parabola, and we also have an inverted U relationship. These are very prominent kinds of relationships that we'll talk about later. So yeah, it looks something like that, absolutely. So yeah, under those conditions, they're going to be engaged in far more word of mouth than if it was a moderate. So that is a key thing to remember. Good. Like word of mouth. And the last point here that we want to sort of emphasize here in post-purchase behavior is this whole notion of cognitive dissonance, which psychologically is a very interesting concept here. Cognitive dissonance. So, you know, the concept of dissonance is very important. So the question becomes, well, what is dissonance? What is dissonance? Well, it comes out of the 1954 work of a guy named Leon Festinger, by the way, who really discovered and researched this notion of what he called dissonance. So what is dissonance? Dissonance occurs, dissonance is an anxiety that exists within us. And anxiety is a negative state. So when we experience a negative state, what do we try to do? Do we embrace it and try to magnify it?
No.
No, we try to get rid of something that doesn't feel good, right?
Yes.
Humans are all about trying to feel good. Humans are all about pleasure. As humans, we are very hedonic in nature. We try to embrace the feel good stuff and get rid of the feel bad stuff, right? That's the way it works. Dissonance is a negative state. It is what we call an anxiety. So then the question becomes, okay, well, how does this anxiety arise within us? Well, the way it arises is that, in this purchase context, is that, you know what, we really want something, right? I want that new truck, but you know what? It is going to cost me like $65,000 to get this new truck, right? So what's good here? I get the new truck, but to get it, I have to give something up to get it. That's a lot of money. That's very painful. That's psychologically very, very painful, right? Giving up a lot of money, bad, but I'm getting something good. So what does that do to us then? What does that do to us? That creates a tension internally. So a tension exists internally within us, which results in an anxiety, and that anxiety is what we call dissonance. And within a purchase context, we call it. And so therefore, like I said, what does the consumer seek to do with respect to cognitive dissonance? It's negative, it's an anxiety, they try to get rid of it. So here is the important point from a marketing perspective. How do consumers get rid of this bad feeling, this cognitive dissonance? This is how we do it. The consumer will typically seek confirmatory evidence to support the decision that they made. Right? Is that consistent in the notes that you have, by the way? Want to check out? So it's all about, does it really, can we get rid of that cognitive? So we seek that confirmatory evidence to support the decision. So what does that mean then in real life? What does that mean in real life? I just bought the vehicle, start using it, and I'm feeling pretty tense about that, right?
Yeah.
I'm hearing, by the way, another term that is sometimes used, and I don't use it, I don't like using it because it means different things fundamentally, I believe. But you see it used quite a bit sort of on the street, so to speak, pop managerial kinds of articles, and that we'll talk about it. They talk about this thing that they call buyer's remorse. I don't like using that term because remorse essentially means regret.
Negative.
And regret is different from dissonance. Okay? I'm very careful about my terminology. And you can have dissonance and cognitive dissonance with no remorse, no regret, right? So it's but it has a similar kind of impact on consumers,
Generally.
psychological. But I don't like using that term. So cognitive dissonance. So what did I say? The consumer then will seek confirmatory evidence to support the purchase that they made. And so what does that mean then? That means then I go out, I make that purchase, bring it on, start using it. I'm still feeling really uneasy about the thing because I just, cut a check of $65,000, say, but I'm really enjoying that new vehicle, right? Cognitive dissonance. So what do? Here's the point. I continue to
Search for
get that confirmatory evidence. So I will continue my information search process, if you will.
Yeah.
I'll continue to talk to salespeople
check
who will
reviews
continue to
and
assure
stuff.
me, hey, you made the right choice. This is really good. I'll continue to look at the YouTube videos that will say, this is a great vehicle. I'll continue to do that. I'll continue to read the articles that support all that. All that
reviews and
evidence
stuff.
supports the decision I made. And so what does that do? That seeks to
reduce
my
the
cognitive
cognitive
dissonance.
dissonance.
Yeah, that confirmatory evidence seeks to reduce it. So that's important from a marketing perspective, right? So let's take, for example, if you're a salesperson and you sell a high-end Mercedes-Benz to somebody, and they have to wait 3 months, and this high-end Mercedes, say, costs $175,000, and they contact you as a salesperson, a month later and say, you know what, I really don't feel right about this, I feel overcome, I'm gonna cancel the thing, right?
Yeah.
And you say, that's too bad. What is happening here? Cognitive dissonance has occurred here. And so the person then has chosen to fail in this example, right? So therefore, what should have the marketer or the salesperson done then in an effort to avoid that potentiality?
Follow up the sales with confirmatory input.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So from a marketing perspective, what do you want to do? Keep that relationship going. Keep talking to the person and say, hey, you know what? Once you get it, you're gonna be so happy, it's gonna be great. Another few days, hey, guess what? You know what? This consumer report just came out saying that this Mercedes is blah, blah, blah. Hey, here's a link for a YouTube video that really is reviewing the Mercedes that you're gonna buy, and it is a magnificent thing. hey, you know what, this is a great thing that you're doing, you know, that is the confirmatory. So had the salesperson done something like that, chances are it would not have happened, right? So post-purchase evaluation, post-purchase behavior, three major components that I just said. So yeah, overall in consumer behavior, consistent with what I said, as I say, they're at the centerpiece is the four-stage decision-making process, and we have those four other major categories that will impact how that decision unfolds. Right, which is what, and we've spoken all about those. So, the next thing then from our W5 kind of framework then is about the where, and I've already spoken about that. I've already addressed that within the context of the five-stage process. But, you know, W5, where, when, you know, the timing and all those other issues. So, really then, what is consumer behavior all about? It's about that decision-making process and all of the things that will impact that five-stage process. So yeah, there is certainly a lot to it, and we recognize, consistent with what, you know, Steve said at the outset, you know, we have to adopt that consumer sentiment, recognizing that, yeah, the consumer, they buy the benefits, right, and that is the key thing. So at this point, let us transition out of that micro psychological kind of context of the consumer. And let's think big now. Let's elevate our thinking. And let's elevate it and think broadly, and let's think macro, and let's think organizational level. That's the thinking we want to bring to bear. So when we talk about organizational buying and how the organization makes purchases, we recognize then that there are some key differences between individual level purchasing and the
Business to
organization
business,
purchasing. So most notably, we realize that the organization, when it engages in purchasing relative to the consumer level, yeah, there is more rationality associated with it, right? It's a very much a needs-driven, very much a rational kind of entire process that ensues. And very often, from an economic perspective, we see then that what really stimulates a lot of that purchasing is what we call derived demand. And essentially what derived demand means, do you know what it means?
When customers need something, like individual customers need something, the organizations or industries seek to meet those needs.
Well, essentially what it means then is that organizational demand is often, not always, but often driven by derived demand. And that is, it's often driven by demand that originates from the consumer. So what does that mean? I'll give you an example. If I am a wood provider, wood manufacturer, okay? So I get raw trees, I cut them, I prepare it, I cure it, I do all that kind of stuff. Right? So I get wood, prep all the wood for, let's say, a furniture manufacturer. A furniture manufacturer that will do what? Make wooden furniture. And who does he sell it to? Consumers. That's it. Right? So in that chain, guess what? It's the consumer demand that will demand the furniture. And the furniture sales and the demand is driven by consumer demand, right? And therefore, the demand for my wood is driven by consumer demand for furniture, right? So that means then that my demand is derived. Do we still engage in segmentation? Absolutely.
Are you with me here?
Sure. Still engage in segmentation.
We also recognize that, you know, the buyer-seller relationship is very often more complex than the buyer-seller relationship that exists in the
consumer marketing. Yeah.
So we have that going on. These are operating variables where we're talking about technology, Yeah, and also with respect to the buyer-seller relationship, we find very often that in this context, there is greater dependence between the buyer and seller. So the buyer is buy wood, you know, some can't just buy specialized relationships, right? That's a key thing. So there's greater dependence, if you will. You know, there are only certain manufacturers and machine shops and that kind of thing, which can create those particular input products for the Stellantis assembly line here in Winterthur, right? So it's a greater dependence, so they rely on
The
manufacturers for
manufacturers
uses, so
a
the
lot.
greater interdependence, so to speak, right? When I wanna buy a shirt, I can go anywhere, right? I don't need to so yeah, we have that going on. Furthermore, we realize also, when we look at the loyalty, you know, me as a buyer, is my organization their only kind of, you know,
Source, maybe.
source, you know, that kind of thing, right? So yeah, we can use those kind of things. And, you know, different types of demographic like kinds of variables, you know, like the company size, you know, and where they're located, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the key thing then to realize is that similar to the consumer context, even here, we recognize that those segments still need to be distinct, and they still pretty well still need to fulfill those requirements that we talked about on the consumer side. So we still recognize then that different segments behave differently. There are different aspects associated with each one of those segments. So we recognize that. Now, importantly, another thing that is very simple but is worth mentioning, and also might form a good little exam question too, come to think of it, is something like this. You know, there are different buying classes that exist. One is what we call a straight rebuy. So straight rebuy is what? That's where we just rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. We already have a contract for this and that and this and that. Guess what? We ring them up and say, yep, let's just do it again.
More of this, yeah.
So the university, for example, will order, I'm just making this up, you know, 60,000 rolls of toilet paper every 3 months, every quarter, every 3 months, right? So at nearing the end of that 3-month period, they will contact the distributor, wholesaler, and say, hey, guess what?
More of
Let's
the
do it
same
again,
thing.
straight rebuy. Conversely, we can have a modified rebuy, which speaks for itself, right? So instead of getting, say, for argument's sake, 60,000 this time around, we only need to get 30,000, right?
Okay.
What is that? We're modifying the body, so a modified rebuy, right? And conversely, we can also have a look at a new task, as we call it, a new task kind of purchase situation. And a new task purchase is what? It's a new task purchase. Right?
Give me something new.
So, something new that hasn't been done before. Yeah. So we have that. So, you know, again, when we talk about segmentation and understanding the customer, here's the customer, yeah, we have to engage in research, we need to collect data, you know, very often in order to understand a particular segment or potential customer. Right? So therefore, we realize here, especially in the organization and buying context, that, you know, generally we use very little primary research, right? More often than not, we use secondary research. So in other words, we can use, you know, broad macro kinds of, you know, information that's available to us from, say, Stats Canada, U.S. Bureau of Census information, the trade journals, union publications,
Financial reports, maybe.
financial reports from, you know, a variety of other sources that compiled information other than what we are physically doing, we can package all that. And generally, in the organization of buying behavior the kind of context, that's what we use for the information, generally speaking. So where in the consumer side, we spoke about a 5-stage process. We essentially have a similar kind of, at its core, that 5-stage process. Absolutely, that still maintains. However, here we sort of flesh it out a little bit to add a few more kind of stages, right? Generally speaking. And yeah, the need arises, and then we determine, you know, generally what the broad characteristics are that we need. And then we take a step into more detail, and depending on what we're doing, we might spec it out, create particular specifications of what we need to purchase, right? So we spec it out, then what do? We identify potential sources, you know, of organizations that can provide what we're looking for. And then we could invite, you know, proposals through RFPs, you know, request for proposals. We could invite these different proposals. And then what do? Once we get these proposals, we will evaluate each one and arrive at a particular supplier. And then we will engage the buyer, and she will set up the connections and make it happen kind of a thing. We get it, we start using it, and then we engage in that post-purchase kind of behavior again, where we assess, you know, how things are working out, et cetera, et cetera. Did we get the delivery on time? All these kind of things, right? Quality, all that kind of stuff, right? So that is key. Now, the last topic area here that we want to consider is this notion of what we call a buying center, a buying center. You will see this in the textbook, which is quite well described. Am I right? Is it in the textbook? Pretty sure it is, right?
Yeah.
The buying center? Is it in the textbook? Yeah. And so basically when we talk about a buying center here, the key thing is that it's like a, you know, it's like a conceptual kind of framework that we introduce when we're teaching this kind of thing. So in other words, we will not walk down the hallway of an organization and see a sign saying overlook, saying buying center. Yeah, that just doesn't work. The notion here that we're trying to tap into is that there are a variety of functions internal to the organization that are used and executed in the entire or deliberate buying process. That's the notion. And so therefore, the question arises from, okay, given that it's more of a rational, deliberate, big scale kind of thing, how does it work, right? So we recognize then that, you know, the buying center is kind of the way that buying works at the organizational level, not so much at the individual level. So there are, here I've listed 5, sometimes you'll see 6. Major functions that are sort of embedded within the umbrella of what we call a buying center. So the first major function then is what we call the initiator function. And that is the person or people who are involved in the initiation of the entire process. So, you know, if we are talking about toilet paper, for example, you know, our cleaners here would identify that need and that requirement, and they would move forward, so they would initiate that order form, right? They would put the order form in and they would move forward accordingly. And they would send it up to their managers and supervisors who, they would influencers. They would influence these orders, if you will, from the lower end employees. They would apply some kind of influence. So, you know, where employees would say, okay, in this building I need 10,000, this one 20,000, 40,000, so therefore, you know, we need to, you know, reorder 60,000 overall. The influencer might say, yeah, but you know what, we can shift the surplus here to deficiencies there, and so therefore, this time around, instead of buying 60, we only need to buy really 25,000. You know, so an influencer will influence us. And then, of course, we have the decider, which is the managerial requirement to sign off on the actual purchase and that process that's associated with that, right? And that's a whole thing in itself, right? Just the sign out process and the process involved in committing funds to a particular purchase, which is a whole thing that we won't get into here. And then, once that has been solidified, then what happens? Then typically, depending on the nature of the purchase, but then typically the buyer will be engaged, right? And the buyer is that person, depending on a whole bunch of stuff, but that buyer is the person that will, contact the supplier and say, okay, this is what we're gonna do, we need it by this time and make it happen, right? Which is usually a clerical, secretarial, clerical kind of a function, right? So the buyer makes that happen. And then of course they get it, and then of course another kind of thing is the users, right? The actual users who are involved in that decision-making process. Sometimes we also have an additional level that's sometimes included and considered, and that's what we call a gatekeeper kind of a role. It's the person that controls the overall information inward and outward. But broadly speaking, that is what we call the buying center. And then, of course, similar to the individual consumer level, the decision then is made as to where and when all that. And so therefore, that really sums up organizational buying behavior, recognizing that it's similar to the individual consumer buying, except far more complex, far more deliberate, and importantly, it's void of emotion, right? So on the consumer side, and this is an important point here actually,
instinctual.
On the consumer side, the consumer is subject to a variety of emotional kind of influences, right? So the consumer might, as I do, go down to my Walmart, my favorite place to buy my groceries and stuff, Walmart, and say, you know what, I never really thought about that, I think I'm gonna get that, and I think I'm gonna get that, and I didn't think about that, I'm gonna get that. What are that? These are impulse buying. Impulse buying, so impulsiveness and impulse buying. Impulse buying is buying that occurs without pre-planned, pre-thought, right?
Yeah.
And that's why, by the way, as marketers, we can capitalize on it, right? And by the way, as a particular vulnerable area that we as marketers can capitalize on in order to enhance impulse buying is at what we call the point of sale. And that's why we see a lot of low involvement kinds of products being made available at the point of sale.
Checkouts.
At the checkouts, gum, chips, candy, magazine, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Why? It capitalizes on impulse buying, especially when consumers are just standing there waiting.
Yeah.
It's a vulnerable spot. So we can take advantage of that from a market perspective. So in the organizational buying, we don't have emotions and impulsive or compulsive kind of buying. That's included. Right? So it's void of that. So therefore, at this point, as we sum up, next class we'll talk about market structure analysis, competitive analysis, and move forward with your Connect assignment. And I would also say, we do have a midterm coming up, so I would, in the strongest sense, and again, like everything else, most students that follow my advice do very well. Students that choose to reject my advice and they don't do so well, and they get themselves involved. There are always those that will reject your advice, unfortunately, to their detriment. But anyway, I strongly advise you to start reviewing your notes. Those of you who have taken them, to review them, learn the material, and you do all that, you'll be focused. We do have a midterm exam that's coming up on the 1st of March, right? So we have that coming up. And an important point also is that in the syllabus, I have stated the time of, do you remember what time I stated? It's actually going to be 7:30. I will tell you that later, but because backroom kerfuffles that are occurring, we can only start at 7:30 as opposed to 7, so whatever. But certainly the location is as indicated, which is in the, you know where it is? In 104 in this building, which is the auditorium. So, yeah. So, again, I will remind you of all that as we approach. But, bottom line, we start at 7:30, not 7. Okay? But, other than that, same place. Okay.